Prologue. London, May 1811. Elizabeth Bennet stood on the pavement in London and read the sign on the brick wall behind the man selling tickets on the street in Cheapside.
The third and last grand city lottery of freehold houses. What is a lottery of freehold houses, Uncle?
It is a way for architects and home builders to make a great deal more profit than they would by selling a new house on the market, Uncle Gardner explained. A freehold house means that you own not only the entire building, but also the land the building sits on. Ownership will never revert back to a landlord. Most freehold houses in London sell either at auction or by lottery. Think of it this way, Lizzie. You might never be able to buy a house, but perhaps you could afford to risk £4, yes? And even if you did not win the grand prize, which for this lottery is a brand new house and a sum of money, you might win something. There are many people willing to risk £4 on such a chance. They will draw many prizes because they will sell tens of thousands of tickets, perhaps hundreds of thousands. If you won the smallest prize, it is still £500. That is not a house, but it is still an incredible sum of money to many people. It does not say how much money comes with the house if you won the grand prize. What is the sum in question, sir? "'Tis not fixed," said the businessman behind the table. "'Twill depend on the number of tickets sold, a percentage of the profit. Not less than 5,000, certainly, perhaps as high as 20 or 30, but there are no guarantees." "And is there a charitable endeavour attached?" asked Uncle Gardner. Then he said to Elizabeth, "There is often a promise for a donation to a charity to soothe the worries of those who feel that gambling is wicked." 5% of the profit will go to the parish schools in the East End, sir," came the man's reply.
Do you think gambling is wrong, Uncle?
Elizabeth asked curiously. "Well, Lizzie, there are different kinds of gambling, and in my opinion they are each quite different in terms of good or wicked. Take the parish game night, when you all purchase a game card and play housey-housey. You might win a prize or you might not, but you had fun, and what was important was that funds were raised for the parish. That is not particularly wicked, in my opinion. Then there are my sister's little card parties. People who are not poor or in need betting a few pennies on a night of entertainment is also of little danger, though I do believe ladies should exert caution, particularly girls like Lydia and Kitty, who have limited pin money, and in my opinion ought to be playing for buttons." Footnote 1. Housey-housey was the form of bingo that was played in England as far back as 1700. It was invented in 16th century Italy. Her uncle continued. "Then there are the rich, or worse, not so rich men who go to gambling clubs or taverns and wager large sums of money that they cannot afford to lose. Some taking food from their children's very mouths, others losing their daughters' or wives' dowries, some so bad they lose their estates, the very homes and lands their families have held for generations. That is certainly very wicked. This here is relatively innocuous, in my opinion, as long as one is not spending funds they cannot afford to lose, or taking food from their children. When I sit down at a table to play cards with other men, I view it as an amusement rather than a way to win money. I decide before I begin how much I am willing to spend on that night's entertainment, and when or if I lose that much, I stop. The key to everything is moderation, Lizzie. This is my opinion, though there are those who are very pious who believe that all gambling is evil."
Well, I certainly cannot afford to lose £4. Papa gave me funds to spend on clothes while I was here. He would not be pleased if I returned with a lottery ticket instead,"
said Elizabeth. "How much can you afford to spend?" her uncle asked curiously.
"Well,"
Elizabeth said uncertainly.
"perhaps £1. But that is not enough to buy a ticket."
"You could buy a share of the ticket, and the prize would be split between you and another after you won. But instead, let us do this. If there was anyone who would benefit from owning a home and receiving a large cash prize, it would be you, Lizzie. You spend your £1, and I will pay for the rest of your ticket. It can be your birthday present."
"Uncle, 'tis too much,"
Elizabeth objected as her uncle ignored her and purchased the ticket. "Not at all, my dear. Now here, keep this ticket safe in your reticule and hide it when you get home. Then you may spend the next few weeks thinking about what you will do if you win. That is the best part of a lottery ticket. Chapter 1.
Colonel Fitzwilliam, sir,
Darcy's butler Ferguson said as he announced Darcy's cousin to the study in his London house. "Richard," Darcy exclaimed, getting to his feet and clapping his cousin on the back. "You were not expected again for months." "There has been a delay with the departure of my regiment. The ship that we are to depart on needs significant repairs, and there is no other that can accommodate us at this time," Fitzwilliam explained. "What have you been doing with yourself in George's absence?" "It has been dismal in the extreme," drawled Darcy. "I am to visit her monthly, and in this stinking, unseasonably early heat, town is nearly unbearable. All of the nobility have abandoned London for their estates." "Well, let us make it bearable, shall we not? I rarely have leave that I am not expected to spend dancing attendance upon my mother, my aunt, or my cousin," said Richard, slapping his knees. "No one knows I'm at leisure besides you. My parents are at Matlock, and Aunt Catherine does not expect us until Easter, which is months and months away, if I'm even on these shores come spring, which is doubtful. None but the unlanded and very debauched remain in the city in this heat. Let us take advantage of it, and enjoy what London has to offer, a bachelor at leisure for a time. When does Georgiana expect you again?" "Not for 3 weeks," said Darcy suspiciously. "Your idea of bearable sounds distinctly unenjoyable to my way of thinking. You will gamble far more than you ought." "But you will humour an old soldier, will you not?" Richard cajoled. "After all, who knows when I may have the opportunity again? I promise that if it even appears that I'm beginning to lose, I will call it a night. I'm not dependent upon the game, as so many men are. And if I have not been called to return to my unit by the time you leave for Ramsgate, I shall join you and give my young cousin a surprise. What say you, Darcy?" "I suppose I cannot deny you. As you say, you could be recalled any time, and your leave is rarely your own, with the demands of the ladies in our family." "Where's that fellow you gad about with? Bingley? He's an amenable fellow, probably first-rate at kicking up a lark. Shall we invite him?" "Very well. But we will go to the quality clubs, not the copper hells full of Haymarket ware that you frequent on your own. I do not know why I keep my subscription to Sedgwick's. I only go when you wish to, or occasionally with Bingley for billiards. I inherited it from my father, and who knows why he kept it? He probably inherited it from my grandfather. Lord knows, after the trouble my grandfather caused the family in that place, it ought to have been cancelled. Perhaps after this outing, I will do it." "That would be a shame for me, though safer for your heirs, perhaps," said Richard. "You cannot hope that they will all have your moral compass." 2 hours later, Bingley arrived for dinner in answer to a note penned by Darcy's valet. This was a system that the two men had worked out. When Darcy wished to send a message to Bingley, it was penned by his valet, ensuring that Miss Bingley did not recognize the writing, resulting in Miss Bingley missing many opportunities to tag along on invitations not meant for her. "Darcy!" Bingley exclaimed when he was shown into the drawing-room. "I cannot say how pleased I was to have been invited out on the town with you and your cousin. The tales of your exploit are legend in the hells, Colonel, and your brothers are worse. As you instructed, Darcy, I brought my trunk, prepared to stay for some days." "Do not encourage him, Bingley," Darcy warned. "We are to show him a good time before he returns to battle, but the last thing we need is to have him competing with his brother's infamy." "The only thing preventing me from making Ashley appear as fast as a country miss not yet out of the schoolroom is the fact that most of my larks are enjoyed on the continent," Fitzwilliam laughed, shaking Bingley's hand. Ferguson appeared to announce dinner, and the men followed him to the small dining-room the Darcys used when they were alone or only entertaining a few guests. "So how long is this bout of debauchery to last?" Bingley asked easily, as the men enjoyed the cook's excellent fare. "Until my cousin bores of it." Darcy grinned. "He always claims to be so much worse than Ashley, but the truth of the matter is Richard cannot abide such dissipation for long without productive employment to balance it. He is too used to real work on the front. Ashley, however, can carry on for months without ever having a single sensible or practical thought enter his mind. I give him a week, but our limit is 3 weeks when I travel to Ramsgate to visit my sister." "Have you noticed anything about Georgie's letters?" asked Fitzwilliam. "She seems oddly distant of late." I have, but her companion says that it is not uncommon for girls her age to feel a sudden necessity to display exaggerated maturity, and that often displays itself as a disinclination to communicate with one's parents, or in Georgie's case, guardians. That is certainly the truth, Bingley said, applying himself to his roast beef. When Caroline was Miss Darcy's age, she went an entire quarter treating our father as if he were the stupidest person in the world, and even refusing to speak to him. He was just entering his illness, and when I visited from school, I gave her a piece of my mind like you cannot imagine. Then I wrote to Louisa and invited her and hers to come to Scarborough and stay with father and Caroline to ensure her compliance. That does not sound very much like you, if you do not mind my saying so, Bingley, Fitzwilliam said pointedly. Bingley was notorious for his lack of control over his sister. The key to Caroline is choosing one's battles, Bingley said amiably. One cannot fight over everything, or one would be an angry person all the time. When I truly put my foot down, my sister knows it is pointless to attempt to change my mind. But enough of Caroline. I meant to ask you, Darcy. I'm leasing an estate like we talked about, and I took that fellow you recommended, Mr. Lambert, with me to look it over, and he said it is sound. How long will you be in Ramsgate? Might I convince you to come for a month or two this summer to teach me some of what I must know? I leave in a week, myself. Miss Darcy is welcome to accompany you. Congratulations, Bingley, said Darcy enthusiastically. I'm glad you sought out Lambert's assistance. Of course I will come. I'm only meant to visit Georgie for a week. She means to stay where she is for 2 more months. Where is the place? It is an estate called the Gables, and it is near a small village called Highbury in Surrey, answered Bingley. It currently earns close to 4,000 a year, and the manor is in good repair. The tenant houses and farms need some work, and that is why I took it. I have no objections to paying to fix another person's problems if it assists me in learning what I must know. It will be good for me to learn to solve these issues. The owner fears the steward is crooked, since the place ought to earn closer to 5,000 or 6,000. However, she is an old woman and would rather not deal with the matter herself. I've been given the authority to investigate and replace him if necessary. In that case, yes, I agree I ought to join you, agreed Darcy. I assure you, Bingley, I shall teach you the methods of determining whether a servant is cheating you, and will advise you upon the best course of action, if it turns out to be true. After they dined, they enjoyed a few glasses of brandy in Darcy's study, and made for Sedgwick's in Darcy's carriage with a pair of armed grooms riding on the back. London could be a dangerous place at night, particularly if one was visiting the hells. Sedgwick's was what was known as a golden hell. Patronized by the wealthiest of London, and only by subscription, the gambling den was luxurious and decadent. It had been opened in the very early 18th century by the second and third sons of a man from Cornwall who owned mines. The man gave all 3 of his sons £5,000 and bade them go out and seek their fortunes, warning them that the family estate and mines would be run dry and bankrupt before they could provide for the eldest. The eldest, who had the greatest sense of family loyalty and responsibility, used his funds to buy more mines, hoping to use the funds from them to shore up the family and poor labourers dependent on the local industry. Sadly, the endeavour was an utter failure, just as his father warned him that it would be. The other 2 sons went into business together and opened a gambling den in the city. It began as a copper hell, mostly for working men and the lower middle class. Boxing matches and cockfights were favoured, as well as card games. Over the decades, they suffered 2 fires, though the properties were insured far beyond their value. Many years ago, the Sedgwick in charge purchased half a city block of buildings in a fashionable part of St. James's, demolished them, and had an enormous new establishment built. The gaming house now owned its own bank and was lauded as the most lavish golden hell in London for the last 60 years. Patronage was limited to subscription and only offered to the nobility and to wealthy gentlemen of great worth and connection. Darcy rarely attended, but when he and Bingley did, they kept to the low-stakes tables or the billiard rooms. The boxing matches and cockfights were long gone, though Darcy was certain his cousin would drag him out in search of them long before the week was out. Darcy knew Fitzwilliam would outstrip Bingley in consumption of spirits and all other methods of debauchery in no time at all. Darcy and Fitzwilliam were both in possession of the ability to drink astonishing quantities of spirits without getting unbecomingly foxed, Other men had limits, whereas Darcy, Richard, and Richard's brother Ashley could drink for days, and though they would be mildly drunk, they never lost their faculties. It also took them an incredible amount of brandy to reach such a state of mild inebriation, and so Darcy and Fitzwilliam rarely considered the effort worthwhile, though Ashley never seemed to tire of it. It was said amongst their family that their maternal grandfather and his father before him had been such drunkards that their progeny were nearly immune to drink. A year after Colonel Richard Fitzwilliam left to fight on the continent, he returned on leave with skills at the card table that were entirely unmatched. He had been training in intelligence and therefore saw and understood every blink, twitch, side-eye, or hesitation displayed by the other players. As a result, he won so often that though many thought he was poor, he had a 5-figure sum in the bank which would start him with a handsome nest egg when he retired from military service. The major domo of the club, and even its owner, watched all of Richard's plays as closely as was possible, and they swore no cheating was involved, nor did they believe the man had the demeanour of one who had the skill of counting cards. Only the very brave, or the very drunk and stupid, sat down to play cards with Colonel Richard Fitzwilliam. Darcy and his guests were welcomed by the club manager with all of the pleasure one might expect for the appearance of one such as Fitzwilliam, who would create excitement and the impulse to spend among the other guests. For a while the men parted, Darcy and Bingley to the low-stakes tables and Richard to the high-stakes games. Darcy shook his head and hoped that Richard did not cause too much of a stir, as he sometimes did when putting his hand to the cards. He did not approve of such high-stakes wagers, thinking it entirely irresponsible, but Fitzwilliam explained from whence his ability came, and since he rarely lost, and he never tricked anyone into thinking he was unskilled or an easy target, Darcy said nothing about it. His uncle had the ability to provide for Fitzwilliam even more handsomely than the generous situations Darcy's father had set by for his subsequent sons who had never appeared, but Lord Matlock chose, as so many other men like him did, to provide his second son nothing more than an education, a commission, and a small allowance during his father's lifetime. His brother might give him a pension when he inherits, but he was under no obligation to do so. At least Richard was given a gentleman's education and had learned about estate matters with his brother. Some second sons were given hardly any such consideration, but at least Lord Matlock saw the wisdom that if a spare was required, one ought to give him the education to manage the task before him in case he inherited. There was also the fact that Fitzwilliam might marry a lady with an estate, or an heiress to one. Considering how little his cousin had otherwise been provided for, Darcy could hardly blame him for acquiring funds however he could, as long as it was not criminal behaviour. There was always an idiot who insisted, no matter how he was persuaded to rethink his wager, on losing everything at least once per month at Sedgwick's. If the men must waste their resources, at least they could be won by a man who would treat them responsibly, rather than one who would only wager and lose them again the following week. Darcy and Bingley played at the tables for 2 hours. Bingley up perhaps £20, Darcy only up perhaps 10, for he truly did not care if he won money, so he never suggested large wagers. They excused themselves from the tables and made their way to the billiards room, drinking and laughing with the others of their set. Darcy made an effort to be pleasant, since there were no women about, and as long as no one approached him to ask him for loans or to enter their business ventures. The men played billiards for perhaps another 2 hours, Darcy consuming an enormous quantity of spirits, which put the other gentlemen, who typically viewed him as staid and boring, into a more than usually friendly mood with him. So many men held grudges against him because he refused their requests for investment, and their daughters or sisters were not good enough for him. Darcy had never said they were not, but he had been the master of his own estate for years, and society had expected him to settle down long ago. They later made their way to the high-stakes tables, where, as usual, there was a large crowd around the table where Richard and one other player remained, the other players having left the game without their dignities, but at least with most of their fortunes intact. One of the owners of the club, Lewis Sedgwick, stood near Richard, watching the play carefully. Near the dealer stood the major domo doing the same. Darcy and Bingley took seats at a small table nearby, ordering drinks and some food from the servants. It was nearly 3 in the morning when they sat, and they watched Richard and the other man, Viscount Lymington, the heir to the earldom of Rutledge, as the stakes grew higher and higher. Richard was at the high-stakes table, but one of the things that worked in his favour was that he hardly ever made incredibly high wagers, so when he lost, he of course lost a great sum, but not everything. This maddened his competitors, who lost mediocre sums to him over and over until it began to add up to life-changing amounts of money. Viscount Lymington had reached that point. Over the course of more than 6 hours, Lymington had lost over £12,000. Finally, at the end of the night, when the sun was rising outside, the Viscount demanded that Fitzwilliam play one more hand for incredibly high stakes to allow Lymington to win the sum back. Fitzwilliam declined, saying that Lymington had played for over 6 hours, and if he were going to win, he would have done so by now. Lymington threw down the deed to his estate, recently deeded to him by his father, in the hopes of teaching him something and making the young man more responsible. The name of the estate was called Green Hollow Hall, near Birmingham, and it earned more than £6,000 a year. The hall immediately erupted into shouts and objections, some the Viscount's friends, others the friends of his father. Even Darcy and Bingley protested the irresponsible action on the part of the young nobleman. At Sedgwick's, it was customary for the majordomo, the dealer, and the owner to discourage a player from ruining himself. Yes, life-altering sums were won and lost in a single hand every single night, but none could claim that they lost everything they owned without being strongly discouraged from doing so by the owners of the club themselves. The Sedgwicks did not want a poor reputation amongst a resentful population of noblemen. They instead had a reputation for entertaining the elite of London with the highest integrity. Fitzwilliam agreed with them all. "I do not want your estate, Lymington, though you deserve to lose it considering this display of stupidity. Your entire estate is not worth losing to save 12,000. "I do not give a damn. I never wanted the bloody estate," Lymington exclaimed. "My father gave it to me earlier this year in an effort to remove me from town, but I have no wish to live like him, cooped up in the country, trapped by the rain, entertaining the local spinsters and the vicar. I do not need the damned place. It is a millstone about my neck. In the absence of a younger brother, I inherited a comfortable fortune and a small townhouse from my mother's brother. I can live the life I enjoy without difficulty here in town. The only purpose that deed serves is to return to me the funds I lost tonight, and if I lose the deed as well, then at least my father will learn to leave me the hell alone." When Fitzwilliam continued to demur, Lymington stood and threw his glove on the table. "By God, Fitzwilliam, I demand that you concede, or I shall call you out onto the field." Again the hall was thrown into disorder. Fitzwilliam only raised a brow and said, "Why would you do that? You must know that the only thing that I am better at than cards, when not on a battlefield, is besting men at swords and shooting. Are you trying to get yourself killed?" Lymington continued to declare that either Fitzwilliam would comply or Lymington would have satisfaction. Disputes like this broke out between gentlemen in London often, and even amongst the recruits in the regiment, such conflicts were common. There was no doubt that this one would be discussed by the gossips and in scandal sheets all over town tomorrow. "I want it on record for his father that he gave me no other alternative than either to destroy him at the tables or kill him," Fitzwilliam announced. The men in the room all grumbled their agreement, displeased with the reckless libertine. It was all too obvious he would make no better an earl than a viscount. The game began, and it truly seemed to Darcy that his cousin's heart was not in it. Darcy wondered if Richard would lose on purpose. 12,000 plus whatever he had won from the other man before they left the game, half in investments and the other half in the percents, would greatly improve his retirement when he finally decided to retire his commission. And though an estate of 6,000 a year would serve him even better, Darcy knew his cousin would not wish to take one like this. It did not seem to be in the cards for Richard to lose, for fortune had been extremely unkind to Viscount Lymington. There was absolutely nothing useful in his hand. Even a pair of threes would have beat him. The men close enough to see his cards cried out in frustration, and when Fitzwilliam laid down his own, there was a collective sigh of acceptance. Fitzwilliam began to receive claps on the shoulder from the other men about them, as they all agreed that he had done all that one could expect of him to encourage the young nobleman to consider another path. It was agreed by all that the Earl was to be pitied for his unfortunate heir, and that the earldom and its coffers would one day be doomed. Lymington stood and said flippantly, "As I said, perhaps now my father will cease his attempts to improve me." He left the table with the majordomo, who had been a solicitor before his employment at Sedgwick's. It was his responsibility to watch the play, to make judgments when plays were questioned, to ensure that debts were properly recorded and payments were legally transferred. Most of the patrons had gone home or to a nearby brothel that had a business agreement with the gaming club. When Fitzwilliam emerged from the majordomo's office, he and the other gentlemen departed. By the time they arrived at Darcy House, it was nearly 8 in the morning. Thankfully, the cook had breakfast ready early, expecting Darcy and his guests home any time. The men joined one another in the breakfast room and enjoyed a hearty meal before going upstairs to wash and sleep. "I cannot believe the idiocy of that damned fool," grumbled Fitzwilliam to the others as he ate. "I attempted to get him to stop somewhere around 7,000, long before you two joined the others. Each time I attempted to get him to call it a night, he would become belligerent and demand that I allow him to win the funds back. At first I agreed to a few more hands, but then it quickly became obvious that such an outcome was completely impossible. I began in earnest to convince him, but that only seemed to make him worse." Everyone present could see that, assured Darcy. "His father will hear of it. The man was excessively aggressive. What were you expected to do, shoot him? I doubt his father would prefer it." "You never know about that. I've heard that his father is widowed and looking for a young bride in the hopes of providing another heir, considering that Lymington may not even survive to inherit," said Bingley. "Hardly surprising given the man's habits. Someone will shoot him one day." "What will you do with the estate? Will you finally resign your commission?" Darcy asked. "Not yet. 6,000 a year will suit me admirably when the time comes. But as a younger son, it is my place to contribute to the glory of the Fitzwilliams' duty to the crown through my service in the army. When the war is over, and I have won the requisite medals to further distinguish the Fitzwilliam name, then I shall resign my post and take a wife. In the meantime, I shall hire a steward, and Darcy might hopefully be willing to have his man keep a weather eye on things until I am ready to take over management." Over the next week, the men engaged in an endless round of manly activities. They fenced and engaged in pugilism at Gentleman Jack's by day, and made a round of the boxing matches, cockfights, gaming hells, and even a brothel by night. Darcy detested such places, and he touched no one and allowed no one to touch him, but he reminded himself that every day his cousin was away, he might die. It was such a little thing to ask that Darcy show him a good time before he returned to his regiment. His cousin found so little of such entertainments otherwise. It ended up being true that the scandal of the card game reached society and the gossip columns. Fitzwilliam received a scathing letter from his mother, as well as a congratulatory one from his father. The latter was filled with satisfaction for his younger son's good fortune, as well as a warning about becoming too fond of the tables. By the end of the week, Richard had won £18,000, the estate near Birmingham, an expensive set of duelling pistols, a gold watch, as well as an amethyst parure and a valuable silver tea service that would make his future wife very happy one day. Added to the funds he had in the bank and investments already from previous gaming adventures, he felt very comfortable announcing that he was retiring from high-stakes gambling forever. "A gentleman must quit while he is ahead," he insisted firmly. At the end of the week, Bingley, rather worse for wear from attempting to keep up with the other men and bearing Darcy's promise to join him later, left them and returned to his house to collect his sisters and head for his new country seat. As Darcy expected, when Bingley had gone, Richard looked at him and said, "Darcy, the city is deathly dull. What do you say we go to Georgiana straight off tomorrow morning?" Chapter 2. Elizabeth Bennet was returning to her home at Longbourn in Hertfordshire after her morning walk to Oakham Mount. Her family was likely awakening and going about their morning now. They had all slept a bit late after having dined at Netherfield the night before. The new young couple at Netherfield, Mr and Mrs Lockhart, were charming people, and Elizabeth looked forward to having them for neighbours. Mrs Bennet was still smarting from the blow that Netherfield was not to be taken by a single gentleman of large fortune. Fanny Bennet had, at least, refrained from being embarrassing about it in their company, and had been gracious with Mrs. Lockhart. As Elizabeth came down the hillside, she noted a carriage approaching Longbourn. It looked like her Uncle Gardiner's carriage. Elizabeth wondered what could possibly be wrong to bring her uncle so far unannounced at such an early time of day. He must have left London before dawn. Could her aunt or the children be ill, perhaps? She hurried as quickly as she could to the house.
Uncle?
She cried as she entered the hall from the back of the house.
Is everything all right? Are my aunt and the children well?
Everyone is fine. Everyone is just fine. Edward Gardiner smiled at all of his other relatives who had joined them in the hall with the same concern as Elizabeth. I have some business with Thomas in his study, but first I will join you all for breakfast, if I may, and hear your news.
Of course,
his sister crowed, allowing him to kiss her cheek.
Into the breakfast room, all of you. You may sit by me, brother, and tell me what my sister-in-law has been up to in London. I'm vastly excited about what Madeline told me in her last letter about the new fashion for long sleeves.
The family were all their usual selves as they spoke to and over one another at the breakfast table. No one questioned Mr. Gardiner again about the reason for his visit, because, when gentlemen had business together, it was none of the women's concern. Elizabeth could not, however, help wondering what was happening, particularly because her uncle kept looking at her and smiling. It was evident that Thomas Bennet was similarly curious, for the moment his brother-in-law laid down his fork, Bennet was hurrying everyone from the table and encouraging them to go about their mornings. Jane had work to do in the still-room. Mrs. Bennet was to be at home to callers in the drawing-room. Mary went to practice her instrument, and the younger ladies went upstairs to change the trim on one of Lydia's gowns. "Well, Edward, what is it?" demanded Bennet as they rose from their chairs. "In your study, please, Thomas," Gardiner insisted, and followed his host into the hall. He caught Elizabeth there and hissed, "Do you still have it? The lottery ticket." When Elizabeth opened the book she was carrying and showed him the ticket she was using for a bookmark, he said, "You will want to frame it after today. Go to your father's study." He then went to the front door, whistled for his manservant, and bid him to wait outside the door of his brother's bookroom, ensuring their privacy. "Elizabeth, what are you doing here?" her father asked as she entered the room behind him.
Uncle instructed me to come in, Papa,
Elizabeth said meekly. She had no idea how she could be concerned with the men's business. Could it be possible that she had won the smallest prize of the lottery, just as her uncle had told her she might? What would she do with £500? Uncle Gardiner finally entered behind them, carefully closed the door, and embraced Elizabeth, spinning her about. "Lizzie, you won! You won the lottery!" "Whatever can you mean, Edward?" said Bennet, rising to his feet. "When Lizzie visited us for her birthday, I helped her pay for a lottery ticket as her present. I told her to have fun daydreaming about what she might do if she won. Lizzie, you won! You won the grand prize!"
The grand prize?
Elizabeth cried.
Not the last one, Uncle. Surely you jest. Certainly it must be the last prize.
"I cannot take it in. I must sit," said Mr. Bennet, shaking his head and falling back into his chair. "What lottery are you speaking of? And how much did Lizzie win?" "It is the Grand City Lottery, brother. Lizzie has won a brand new house, a freehold in London, and £15,700, answered Gardiner. 15,000 and a house? Said Bennet in surprise. What sort of a house? A 4-story modern brick home with 6 bedrooms and a goodly number of public rooms. It is in a neighbourhood slightly more fashionable than Cheapside, a very genteel location. The drawing was yesterday, and when I filled out the ticket with your name on it, Lizzie, I listed myself as your guardian because I thought it would be most convenient. I had a feeling that you would win something, so I went to the Guildhall yesterday when they drew the winners, and you won, Lizzie. You won the house and the money.
What must I do?
Asked Elizabeth uncertainly. You do not need to do anything. Your funds are now in a trust in a bank in London with myself as the trustee. The house is deeded similarly. "That was slick, Edward," said Thomas, with an edge to his voice. It had been presumptuous of Gardner to set himself up as Elizabeth's trustee before anyone knew of the matter, and rather disrespectful to her father. "With all due respect, Thomas, I will not be burdening you with the task of protecting Elizabeth's good fortune from my sister. Now, there will be no way for Fanny to take the money, and no way for her to badger you into doing so," said Gardner firmly.
Uncle Gardner paid for most of the ticket anyway. Uncle, you really ought to keep the money for my cousins. Would not that be fair? I could keep the house, and we will not be thrown to the hedgerows when Papa dies. Perhaps we could let the place and put the funds towards something cheaper and easier to manage here in Meryton. A charming little cottage with a little extra from the rent of the new house.
Lizzie, I meant it when I said that I could think of no one who would benefit from a freehold home and a sum in the bank more than you. I thank God that I was inspired to help you buy that ticket. You will be safe for all your days now, even after marriage. No man will take all you own, for he must go through me as your trustee, and I will see to your marriage articles ensuring it. Do not get married without a proper marriage settlement approved by me. Promise me, Lizzie."
I promise, of course. But is it not unfair for me to keep the house and all of the money? If it is my money, I would be happier if we shared it between me and my sisters. 3,000 each? And later, Mamma's portion will make it 4. Is that not better?
Elizabeth protested. "No, Lizzie, it is not better, and I will explain why. The interest on £3,000 will not be enough to keep you, not in that house, and barely at a respectable level even outside of the house if you rented it out and lived meagerly in the country. With the interest from your winnings, you can live in the house, though rather frugally if you have your mother and sisters with you, for all of your days, whether you are married or not. If you do this, you can help your mother and sisters, but if you split the money for your sisters' dowries, you will not have the necessary income to live in the house," Uncle Gardner explained. "It might seem unfair that such a good thing has happened to you and not your sisters, but that is the way of life. Life is about changing, Lizzie. Nothing shall ever stay the same. None of you will have the same things as the others as you grow up. Some of you may marry rich men, others poor men. Perhaps 1 or 2 may not marry at all. Some of you may die in childbirth as young women. The others might live until their 90th year. Nothing is ever fair or equal, my dear." "He is right, Lizzie," her father said. When she turned to him, he asked, "When Lydia won £10 at Housey last year, did she share it with all of you?" Elizabeth shook her head. "Did she even buy you so much as a ribbon?" Elizabeth shook her head again, miserably. "Then you have your answer, my dear. I am certain that you will be much more generous with all of them than any of them would be with you, save perhaps Jane or Mary. You cannot beggar yourself to provide for them. Providing for them was my job, and the fact that I failed at it does not mean that you ought to suffer for it." "Thomas, I will not hear you sounding self-pitying over a situation that you ought to have prevented," said Gardner sharply. "Perhaps we should go and tell the others. But first, Lizzie, do you want me to have the house let straight away? And I took the liberty of separating the 700 from the rest, in case you wanted to do something with a portion of the money now. I will hold on to it until you need it."
I am not Lydia, and nor am I mean or cruel, so I would like to do something nice for my mother and sisters,
said Elizabeth.
"Might I have some funds now so I might treat them each to a new gown, a bonnet and some slippers? And yes, if you think it is a good idea, please let the house. It is smart to let it earn something while it can. There is no reason for it to sit empty."
"It will be harder to lease, considering it has no furniture or housewares of any kind, but I suggest that you rent it out anyway and then set those funds aside to buy some furnishings," said Uncle Gardner sensibly. "You see things for sale in London by desperate people all the time. I shall keep an eye out for bargains that cannot be passed by, and I can store it all for you in my warehouses until you need it." To say that Fanny Bennet found the situation unfair was an understatement. First she exclaimed, then she shrieked, then she was bewildered, then she raged like a banshee over the injustice that Elizabeth was to have 15,000 at the house in town, and Jane was not.
With such a fortune, Jane would be married to a wealthy man, perhaps even a peer in less than 3 months, brother. Then she would have no need of the house, and we could all live there when Thomas dies. It is shameful to waste such gifts upon Lizzie when they will do her no good.
Fanny ranted. When her brother would not budge, she tried to negotiate.
Let Lizzie have 5,000 then, if she absolutely must be so mean with her sisters. Then bestow 7,000 on Jane, who will surely find a husband quickly with a proper dowry of any kind, and let the rest be shared between the other girls.
Fanny was adamant that Jane ought to receive the largest portion of the funds, being the eldest, the most beautiful, and, in Fanny's opinion, most likely to snare a wealthy husband. Gardiner explained patiently to his sister that this was actually a blessing for the women of the family and the solution to her fears if she allowed herself to see reason. You say that Jane is the most likely to wed, and perhaps that is so. I really could not say, Fanny. But you must allow that Lizzie is your cleverest daughter, and consider that perhaps she is not so clever for nothing. Elizabeth has the acumen to manage such a fortune and support you and the girls in London when Thomas dies, but we must be careful with the funds. Even with such a sum, you will need to live carefully in such a neighbourhood in London on the income in question with so many women. If the funds remain intact, then you and the girls are saved and will live in comfort and gentility. If the funds are split between the girls or spent, then you will not have enough to live on. Fanny Bennet was silent, considering the matter, as her brother continued. I do not want to hear after I am gone, Fanny, that you have been scolding or badgering Lizzie. She is not in charge of the money, neither is Thomas. I would never have allowed either of you to take it from her. I am the trustee of Lizzie's fortune. She could not give it to you or Jane, even if she wanted to. And I assure you, as mean as you paint her, she wanted to. She tried to insist that it be shared equally amongst all of your girls, but that is not the way to save you all. Do not punish her for what has been my decision.
And I do not have to take my share of Mamma's dowry, do I?
Asked Elizabeth brightly, hopeful that perhaps her mother might somehow be reasoned out of being furious with her.
Can that be done, Papa? Should we ask Uncle Phillips? That would give my sisters a little more for their portions. And I wish to tell you all that Uncle has given me a very small portion of my funds, and though it will not stretch to anything significant, there is enough for me to treat all of you, Mamma and all of my sisters, to an outing in Meryton, or perhaps even St Albans. I think we might all manage a new gown and a bonnet. Will that not be nice? Nice! Oh, it sounds like a lovely day. How kind of you, Lizzie,
said Jane, catching on to Elizabeth's plaintive attempts to appease her mother. Jane eyed Mary and her sisters.
Though I am not one for vanity, I look forward to an outing with Lizzie, and I'm grateful that she, so far, seems to be amenable to taking us all in if something happens to Papa and we are not married. We all know she does not have to. To be homeless is a fear we have all shared for years, save Papa, who is fortunate enough to be secure just by being alive. And I, for one, am thoroughly beholden to Lizzie for being a means to its end. Thank you, sister. You are too good to us. I promise that I shall endeavour not to be a burden. Not at all, Mary,
said Elizabeth in bewilderment of everything that happened that morning.
It is not fair, Uncle, that you gave Lizzie a house and a fortune,
said Lydia.
I'm sure that if any of us younger sisters were ever invited to visit you, that we should likely become as dear to you as Lizzie has.
Lydia Bennet, her father chastised her. Her uncle smiled. I wish I could give each of you a house and a fortune as well, Lydia. But I did not give them to your sister. I bought her a lottery ticket as a birthday present, and she won it by chance. But I should hate to be accused of having favourites, so I promise you this. From now until you are married, whether you are visiting us in London or not, I shall buy each of you a lottery ticket for your birthday so that each of you has a chance. Will that suit you? Lydia and Kitty both jumped up and hugged their uncle and thanked him, Lydia crowing about the house in London that she would win, and Kitty insisting that hers would be every bit as grand.